1974, a beautiful young student is slain in cold blood.
No! Out of my... Get out! No, go!
Miss Miller was clearly raped and murdered in a violent struggle.
Her social circle and many lovers yield scores of suspects.
Several people knew her, partied with her. It was that age of sex and drugs.
I wanted to learn more about Mr. Ferris, Tony Alvarez, Mr. Esfehani.
A frustrating investigation spans 3 decades.
I want to make sure somebody goes to jail for this.
Can forensic science finally place a killer at the scene? This dramatic reconstruction is based on eyewitness accounts, police evidence, and court records.
Cheryl.
Saginaw, Michigan resident Maxine Gutierrez arrives home at 6 a.m. after a night of partying. She checks on her roommate, Cheryl Miller.
Oh my God. Hi, hello. There's been a horrible, my roommate Cheryl Miller, she's dead. Yeah, I need 1003 South Jefferson. I need someone now. Come now.
Police descend on the East End house in this blue-collar city of 100,000. Investigators enter Miller's bedroom and get their first look at the disturbing scene. Tom Reeder is made lead detective.
I was notified of the homicide of Cheryl Miller. I actually developed the negatives for the photos that our identification officer on the scene took. She was wearing a blue shirt, and there was underwear laid across her breast area. There was abrasions on her collarbone. Her nose was bleeding. You could see marks on her neck.
Miller's injuries lead police to a grim conclusion.
Let's say strangled, raped.
Downstairs in the living room is evidence that someone has broken in.
The window was open, and the screen was no longer in position. The curtain was hanging outside. It appeared as though the person entered, tipped over the lamp, and then the person went upstairs. And found Cheryl. They took measurements, fingerprints. They tagged evidence, all the clothing that was across her breast.
Several hairs are recovered from Miller's shirt and points on her body. They are sent to the lab.
Prints? Anything?
4 sets of suspicious prints are located. On the living room window, the banister leading upstairs, above the toilet in the bathroom, and on the bedroom dresser, near Cheryl Miller's head. Maxine Gutierrez informs police her roommate was 21 years old and a popular art student at nearby Delta College.
We went to a bar around the corner here.
According to Gutierrez, she and Miller spent last night with their usual gang, living it up at a popular local bar called The Scene.
On June 14th, which was a Friday, it was very busy that night, very crowded.
All right, girl, I gotta get going. Yeah.
Gutierrez explains Cheryl left for home around 2 a.m.
I went out to a party at around 4, and then I came back here at 6. I went up, and I just found her. She.
Detectives wonder who could have performed such a savage act on this beautiful young woman. They hope the autopsy will provide clues to the killer's identity. The pathologist sets time of death between 5:30 and 6 a.m. The cause, strangulation. A small vaginal laceration and recovered semen confirm rape. The pathologist makes slides from the semen and studies them under a microscope. Finding no sperm in the fluid, he prepares a report declaring the killer to be sterile. The slides and reports are sent to forensic specialist Richard Bisbing for his analysis.
This just came in.
Oh, okay, great, thanks very much.
I worked at the East Lansing Laboratory for the Michigan State Police, and my responsibilities there were serology and trace evidence. So I did the blood and semen identification, and then identification and comparison of hairs and fibers and other types of trace evidence. There was no DNA to use at that time.
Bisbing conducts his own study of the semen slides to see if they can help point to a suspect.
I examined them microscopically and did not find any sperm on the slides. And that was the extent of the analysis that was possible.
Bisbing now turns his attention to the hair evidence forwarded to him by investigators.
They found head hair, eyebrow hair, and pubic hair of a dark, non-negroid. It was probably Asian, Mediterranean, Hispanic, dark black hair.
Police set their sights on a dark-haired killer. Interviews with people close to the victim leads them to their first suspect, Abbas Esfehani.
He was a Delta College student, 21-year-old from Iran. He came to Delta as a soccer player. As a matter of fact, he played on their very first soccer team.
Esfehani and Miller were lovers who had recently ended their relationship. Miller's mother informs detectives in the days before her death, Cheryl had told her Esfehani wasn't handling their breakup well.
You're not the one who dumps me, and he's freaking out. He's acting so weird, and I'm just scared, Mom.
Witnesses put them together on the fateful night of June 14th.
The night of her death, she was seen talking to him at the scene.
It was known that she had broken up with him just a day or two before that.
Esfehani was belligerent, and Cheryl was fed up with his unwanted attention. Detectives obtained Esfehani's prints from student immigration.
The thumbprint on the banister. It was compared by the state police with that of Abbas Esfehani, and they matched that print.
Police have reason to believe they've found the man who murdered Cheryl Miller. When police come for prime murder suspect Abbas Esfehani at his apartment, they discover he's long gone.
Sold his vehicle, boarded a commercial flight back to Iran, and didn't come back.
First a jilted lover, now a fugitive. The events of Cheryl Miller's tragic death become apparent. Esfehani was outraged when Miller ended their relationship. After she refused to reunite with him at the Scene Bar on the night of June 14th, the exchange student snapped. He broke into her house, climbed the stairs to her bedroom, then viciously attacked and raped her.
Get out of my room! No, please get out!
The suspect may have fled, but he's left behind a combination hairdryer and brush device. It may provide evidence that could place him at the scene of the crime. Arrest and flight warrants are issued for Esfehani, and Richard Bisbing's expertise is again brought to bear.
The first hair sample we had was a brush that was taken from the apartment where he had lived, and there was some similarity between the hairs on the brush and the hairs from the body.
But Bisbing knows hair evidence is notoriously unreliable.
We don't know for sure whose brush that was and whether there's a mixture of hairs on the brush. We needed to follow that up with a truly known pulled sample from the individual.
Yeah, it's Tom Reeder, Saginaw PD.
Tom Reeder undertakes to get a decisive hair sample from Esfehani. It It's no easy task.
I contacted Interpol, who contacted the Iranian government in Tehran and requested such samples.
But the samples that eventually make their way to Richard Bisping are suspicious.
He said, I believe these are the hair of a camel's ass. I don't believe they're human. So I recontacted Interpol, the agent that I had been working with. He personally went to Iran and took Esfehani to a hospital, photographed them removing the hairs, putting them in an envelope, and he brought them back to the United States.
In 1974, our only method for doing a hair comparison was through comparing the microscopic features, colors, and length, and other types of features in the hairs.
After careful analysis, Bisping has bad news for investigators.
None of those hairs were similar to any of the hairs on the body.
The prime suspect is looking less like the murderer. It's time for Rita to come up with an alternative. He focuses on Cheryl Miller's social circle, which is quite extensive.
So everybody partied, everybody knew each other, and they carried on.
The house Miller shared with Maxine Gutierrez was the site of frequent gatherings.
I found several people that knew her, partied with her, some even had sex with her. It was that age of sex and drugs. She had several partners during that time.
Rita learns from Maxine that her cousin, Tony Alvarez, lived at the house for a time before the murder.
He was Hispanic male, black hair. So it's possible maybe some of his hairs would be involved in this case.
We are going for a ride on my motorcycle.
Yeah, I don't think
Nope,
so.
we are. Let's go.
No.
Are you
Yeah.
Alvarez and Miller became friends.
It's gonna be fun. We're going.
When interviewed, he confesses to Rita he found Miller attractive.
You ever hit on her?
No.
You wanna give
Rita
us some
requests
samples?
hair samples from his new suspect.
He voluntarily gave me eyebrow, head, and pubic hair samples.
The samples are rushed to the lab for analysis.
It was immediately apparent that his head hairs, his eyebrow hairs, and his pubic hairs were similar to the head, eyebrow, and pubic hairs from the body.
Oh yeah, we have a match.
Rita again believes he could be closing in on the killer. But with precious little supporting evidence on hand, he has Alvarez submit to a polygraph.
Yes.
Did you enter Cheryl Miller's bedroom on the evening of June 14th, 1974?
No.
He flunked it. And the examiner told me that he believed Tony Alvarez had committed this homicide.
Tony.
Rita pressures Alvarez for a confession, laying out his theory of how and why he killed Cheryl Miller. When she wasn't attracted to him, Alvarez became jealous of her lovers. He watched Cheryl from afar, his jealousy building until he couldn't take it anymore. He had to have her at any cost.
Tony would not acknowledge that he committed any crimes. So we do another polygraph.
Did you rape Cheryl Miller?
No.
This time, Alvarez passes the test.
We did a third polygraph, and again, Mr. Alvarez passed, therefore ruled all his polygraphs inconclusive.
Although Esfehani and Alvarez stay on his radar, Rita now searches for more suspects. Soon, another name surfaces that had been mentioned in connection with the murder. Gabriel Ferris.
Somebody said, hey, I think I saw Cheryl Miller talking to Gabriel Ferris out in the parking lot, and he hadn't been interviewed.
He was the son of a prominent family who owned a business here in Saginaw, Ferris Furs.
Gabriel Ferris is himself well known as a drug dealer. Reader learns he was intimately acquainted with Cheryl Miller.
Got a little something for the lady of the house?
No.
Why not?
Because drugs are not what gives me pleasure. Come on.
He was also known as a ladies' man. At the same time, he was kind of a dangerous guy, but he was pretty charming.
The detectives arrange a meeting with Ferris.
Tell me about you and Cheryl Miller.
He said that at one time he was in love with her. They had many sexual encounters.
We used to hang out at her pad a lot. Couldn't get enough of each other, but very, very close too.
Were you at the scene the night of June the 14th?
No, are you kidding, man? I got married the night before.
He told me that he was on his honeymoon with his wife, a lady named Terry Fick, at Augrey, Michigan, Point Lookout. And he was consummating his marriage.
Point Lookout is 65 miles from Saginaw. Ferris claims he and his new bride went to bed at 10 p.m. He woke up around 5 a.m. and stayed around until Terry woke up at noon. Ferris lists a dozen names of people he believes could be the killer.
Cameron Roderick, Tim Luke, and Morris.
I checked every one of those people.
Reader comes up empty, but he wants to investigate Ferris further. The detective seeks out Ferris's wife. Terry Fick confirms the two of them were together in the cottage the entire night. Re-interviewing past witnesses, Reader fails to find anyone who is certain Ferris was at the bar with Cheryl Miller on June 14th. Ferris's alibi appears rock solid. Still, Reader obtains his fingerprints, which are on record from when his suspect was jailed for drug possession. They are sent off for comparison to prints recovered from the Miller crime scene.
They identified the fingerprints of Gabe Ferris on the front of the dresser.
Reader's excitement is tempered by his knowledge of Ferris and Miller's many sexual encounters, any of which could account for his prints. And the realization that Ferris is blonde-haired, unlike the hairs found on Miller's body, make it highly doubtful he's the killer. The search for a viable suspect continues.
I went through the case and every person's name that was ever mentioned, any male, particularly with dark hair, and each person was eventually cleared, and there was many, in excess of 100 people that I checked.
Reader is back to square one.
Bamberg, SPD.
Or is he?
Reader.
In the following months, the detective receives a series of calls from the man he had removed from his suspect list.
Yeah, we're still looking.
Tom, did you check out those cats I was telling you about? Did you check them out? You gotta check them out, man. Check them out, okay?
I said, Gabe, why are you so wanting to know all this information on this case? Oh, I want to get the person that committed this homicide. I want to make sure somebody goes to jail for this. And I said, well, Gabe, I'm working on it. And well, this kind of stirred my interest.
Reader once more sets his sights on Gabriel Ferris. He unearths a story about Cheryl Miller's shock and anger 2 days before her death, after learning Ferris recently stood her up to see his fiancée.
What? That's why he didn't make it to the scene last night? He's getting married.
Yeah, Cheryl.
So done with him.
Reader's subsequent inquiries are stonewalled by an anti-establishment code deeply ingrained in the drug dealer's crowd.
Got supplies here, people. Who wants some? What's up?
I'm a little short, all right? So,
I
grant
trust
me
you.
some dispensation
I
till
trust
next
you, man.
week, okay?
My best friend.
They distrust police and condemn snitching. And Ferris apparently cuts an intimidating figure among his peers. But over time, Reader gets the gang to open up. By 1976, 2 years after the murder, Ferris's marriage is long over. His current girlfriend, 16-year-old Linda Fairbanks, tells the detective about a strange event.
Well, we all drove to Ann Arbor, and me and Gabe and our friends Tom and Patty Skiba went for some trucks, you know. Am I gonna get arrested or anything for that?
Well, no, I don't think that's a problem. It is a murder investigation. I think you'll be okay.
So we just pulled over and partied.
It's a shame.
They're smoking marijuana on the way there, getting high, and somebody brought up a question. Gabe, tell us about Cheryl Miller. And he started talking about the homicide case.
It's really creepy what happened to her, eh?
Yeah, it is. It is.
I can't believe it. Like, nothing like that ever happens here.
I know.
Gross. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I know, man.
Is it true she was raped?
He didn't mean to kill her! He didn't mean to kill her!
Grabbed the headrest, and he did a choking motion on it and said, the killer did not mean to kill her. I know that for a fact. It was an accident.
I couldn't tell if he was talking about himself or putting himself in the killer's shoes. Anyway, it was really upsetting.
In separate interviews, Tom and Patty Skiba tell the same story. And when Rita re-interviews Ferris's ex-wife, Terry Fick, he finds her story from the night of the murder has changed.
Well, the first time that I woke up, I remember it being 2 a.m.
She had woken up, and he was gone. She looked around, and she went back to bed. And she fell back to sleep and thought, well, maybe it was just a dream. I just dreamed he wasn't there.
Then the next thing I heard was a car. Then the cottage door slammed, and I woke up, and it was morning. Okay? Where were you?
I just went out for some breakfast.
He had a pair of white pants on, and there was a spot of blood about the size of a 50-cent piece on his thigh.
There were also light spatters of blood on his shirt.
How'd you get blood on your clothes?
This? Yeah. To rob it with your car. It got lodged under the wheel.
And right after breakfast, he took his clothes that he was wearing that night and burnt them.
The thing is, I'm not sure if this was just a dream or if it really happened or not, you know?
Fick tells Rita she initially supported her husband out of intimidation.
Now we were on our honeymoon and...
She was very, very nervous. She was scared to death of Gabriel Ferris. She thought her life was at risk.
It appears Ferris's alibi has just been shattered. Rita believes his case is now strong enough to have his prime suspect arrested. But the district attorney feels differently.
He had actually contacted me on the phone and he said, Tom, we can't take a chance of taking this to court without some more collaborating evidence.
The district attorney insists the case is too circumstantial. Rita is told he needs to find one more piece of hard evidence against Gabriel Ferris before charges can be laid. The detective labors to find that evidence for the next 8 years.
Did you check out those cats I was telling you
There
about?
wasn't a week gone by that I didn't do something on that case. Review or just go over to the scene. I couldn't get that other piece of evidence.
The unsolved murder of Cheryl Miller haunts Rita until he leaves the force in 1984.
It became a cold case and sat there for a number of years after I retired.
Whoever killed Cheryl Miller still roams free. Then, in 1994, 20 years after the murder, cold case specialist Detective Roy Walton is called in to re-examine some of the evidence.
One of my supervisors came to me and told me they wanted to talk to me about an old case.
2 decades later, Cheryl Miller's murder may yet be solved. Possible new evidence has rekindled police interest in the Cheryl Miller case.
They got what we call a hit through AFIS. That's the Automated Fingerprint Identification System.
A random run of cold case fingerprints, including those from the Miller murder, has turned up a match to the prints long ago recovered from the bathroom wall of Miller's home. They belong to Kevin Lee Grimes. Now 50, Grimes works in a local manufacturing plant. But back in 1974, he ran with the same crowd as Cheryl Miller and Gabriel Ferris. Walton tracks him down, interviews him, and confirms he'd been at the scene of the crime.
He had been to a party at the house.
Walton suggests Grimes met Cheryl, was attracted to her, broke into her house, and murdered her when she wouldn't have sex with him. While cleaning up after the crime, he left his fingerprint above the toilet. But Grimes simply explains visiting the bathroom was natural during the party.
He thought it was kind of humorous that his print would be left above the commode where he was probably drunk at the time.
His upfront cooperation and alibis that check out when investigated leave Walton with one conclusion.
Mr. Grimes had absolutely nothing to do with the crime whatsoever.
But the detective has seen enough to fully reopen the case. Studying the crime scene photos, Walton notes the arrangement of clothes on Miller's body.
Somebody that's not a stranger may very well do things such as throw clothes on top of a body that they have just murdered.
He suspects the killer covered the body out of shame, indicating he knew her. His suspicion deepens when he studies the killer's assumed point of entry and notes the curtain and screen were pushed out, not in.
The break-in, I never did believe. I think it was a staged attempt to cover up the crime.
Walton believes the kitchen door, usually left unlocked, was the killer's access into the house.
Somebody went in that knew her. As a cop, you kind of get a gut feeling, and after reviewing the materials that was available to me, I wanted to learn more about Mr. Ferris. I wanted to learn more about Tony Alvarez. I wanted to learn more about Mr. Esfehani, which meant interviewing absolutely everybody I could find and forming my own opinion of what these people were saying.
The detective re-interviews close to 100 people. He receives new information about Tony Alvarez's whereabouts the night of the murder.
He wasn't there. He was in Bay City, where he lived with his girlfriend most of the time, which is about 11 miles north of Saginaw.
The story of Abbas Esfehani also becomes clearer.
I realized why he had left town, and it had nothing to do with the Miller murder at all. He was a full-time student at Delta College, was not doing well. He had flunked absolutely everything. He simply left to go home because Dad was no longer going to pay for his education that he wasn't receiving.
But an interview with Gabriel Ferris's ex-wife, Terry Fick, keeps Walton's third suspect in the spotlight.
She was definitely fearful of the guy. He was quite forceful during sexual acts.
He was rough. He choked me, tried to rape me. Anything to control me.
In her original statement, she backed up Ferris's alibi. In 1976, she changed her story. Now, 20 years later, it changes again.
Okay.
Gotta go take care of some business, baby.
Oh, don't go, baby. Go back to bed.
All right.
I woke up and he was gone.
In fact, she cried. The first time ever she cried. She was that scared of what we were talking about.
Yeah, I came back in the morning with the rabbit blood, like I told you guys.
You mean the dream?
Yeah, that was no dream. It happened.
This?
Yeah. That night he turned on the news, and we saw that Cheryl had been killed.
Mr. Ferris was kind of crying, but yet no tears were coming out of his eyes.
That was my last girlfriend.
Ferris then told her if he had been allowed to meet Cheryl for one last sexual encounter the night before their wedding, the victim might still be alive.
We hadn't heard that before, but I never got the sense she was lying to me. It's just she expounded on what she had already known.
Walton is finding that 20 years later, the animosity Ferris's crowd felt for cops back in the 70s is replaced by the desire to do the right thing.
Time sometimes heals concerns and fears. You had to break down those barriers.
I'm still not gonna get in trouble or arrested or anything.
Ferris's former girlfriend, Linda Fairbanks, now in her 30s, reveals more details to Walton than she did back in 1976.
She hadn't lied, she just hadn't been totally forthcoming.
No, he didn't say the killer didn't mean to do it.
I didn't mean to kill her.
He said, I didn't mean to do it. I didn't mean to do it. Over and over again, going crazy. He was hyperventilating.
She likes it rough, you know?
Fairbanks claims Ferris then said he choked Cheryl to increase his sexual excitement. And before he knew it, she was dead. The witnesses keep on coming. Walton gets an unexpected call from a man named Leroy Hoffling.
Mr. Hoffling told me that Mr. Ferris was a good friend of his. They used to do drugs and sell drugs together.
Now a war vet, stricken with exposure to Agent Orange, Hoffling wants to ease his conscience before dying.
There's some things you should know about Cheryl Miller.
Hoffling reports witnessing some of Ferris's drunken calls to Rita after the murder.
Did you check out those cats I was telling you about? Did you check them out?
Mr. Hoffling would then say Gabe's explanation was he wanted to know how close the police were getting to him.
the other dudes.
You guys are taking way too long, man.
Hoffling tells Walton the more drugs they did, the more Ferris talked.
Went up to her room and everything, man. She told me to get out. She told me, why am I here? Why I'm married now? Like what?
You know, it is the age of Aquarius.
He had, in fact, had told Mr. Hoffling that he killed Cheryl. They started arguing, and he said that he didn't mean to do it, that it just happened and that he killed her, and then he panicked and left.
Walton visits the last person on his list, Gabriel Ferris, who now lives in Elgin, Illinois.
Mr. Ferris, when I first met him, looked a lot different than the photos and so forth we had of him. He was almost bald and had put on a few years. He didn't have any money and was living in a residence that was owned by one of the local churches.
Here you go, Gabe. Thanks. Thanks for your time today. Why don't you take a look at this? This is your statement from the 70s.
We talked for probably almost 2 hours.
You know, Gabe, I'm a little confused. Are you changing your story?
Telling you. She was just one of 5 chicks I was banging back then.
Did you,
There was just so many things that weren't consistent with his initial story.
He originally testified he stayed in the cottage all night. Now it seems he could have been any number of places.
I remember now. I went for a walk, down by the water.
You said you drove to the store.
What are you talking?
Did you walk to the water or did you drive to the store?
Yeah. I went to the store. And then I went for a walk.
Well, let me tell you what I think. I think you killed Cheryl Miller.
I thought for a minute he was going to lay some things out for me. And then he backed off.
I got places to be. Roy, I didn't have nothing to do with this.
I knew by him just talking to me, he had made a fatal mistake.
Walton then speaks with Ferris's current roommate, who has a fascinating story to tell.
Wait, say again. You said what?
Mr. Ferris was walking around the house that whole day after I had left, saying, he got me. Don't talk to anybody that calls on the phone. I knew I had him. I knew there was enough evidence there that they were going to issue me my warrant.
Walton is correct. On January 15th, 1995, police arrest Ferris, charging him with the rape and murder of Cheryl Miller over 20 years ago. The trial begins 1 year later. The prosecution's case hinges on the testimony of Linda Fairbanks.
He just kept saying it over and over again and grabbing the headrest.
Leroy Hoffley,
But he kept on talking about it, but he always said he didn't mean to do it.
and the surprising testimony of small-time thief Rodney Mays.
His cell was next to mine when we were in the Sag County lockup, and we struck up a conversation.
Mr. Mays said, well, why are you here? And he said, I killed a girl.
I was on my honeymoon. I was on my way to see Cheryl. She didn't want any part of me, so I killed her.
I personally found Mr. Mays to be very credible.
Momentum builds against Ferris when two witnesses change previous statements and claim he was indeed at the bar called The Scene on the night Cheryl Miller was slain.
Then when I woke up again, at 2 a.m., he was gone.
And ex-wife Terry Fick not only destroys Ferris's alibi, she provides harrowing testimony about being physically and sexually assaulted by him on at least 20 occasions before and after their marriage, including once in front of friends.
No, Gabe, stop, please, stop. No, I don't.
In January 1996, Gabriel Ferris is convicted of the rape and murder of Cheryl Miller. He hires a new attorney, David Moran, to handle his appeal.
It was an extraordinary case. It just made no sense on so many levels that right away some of the red flags started to go up.
Moran attacks the prosecution's methods. He claims Rodney Mays was promised preferential treatment for his testimony and lied about it. But Moran's biggest challenge to the court comes in the form of a long-forgotten pathologist's report.
These detectives were told that the suspect they should be looking for was sterile.
Ferris has never undergone a fertility test. He finally has one done, and the result is great news for him. He is clearly not sterile. Now Moran wants Ferris's DNA tested against the semen slides from 1974, as proof positive he's not the killer. But the slides have been missing for years.
The slides had been sent to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, but according to the Michigan State Police Crime Lab technician who received the slides, they were improperly mounted, and so they were just thrown away. We would have loved to have had that evidence.
In August 1999, Ferris's conviction is overturned, and he is granted a new trial. He spends the next 4 years in prison, finally returning to court in February 2004. He is now 54 years old.
A second jury was hung. It was close to being a conviction, but was hung.
Never did I think that it would be a hung jury.
In May 2004, 30 years after Cheryl Miller was brutally slain, the third trial begins. Ferris's lawyer is now Dan Willman. For the prosecution,
all the witnesses said
it's Jeff Stroud.
he more or less.
Evidence keeps pointing to Gabe Ferris.
Stroud presents the same series of witnesses who testify to Ferris's confessions and strange behavior over the years. The defense assails their ability, 3 decades later, to accurately recall events where they were influenced by drugs and alcohol. Willman reminds jurors none of the suspect hairs recovered from Cheryl Miller belonged to Ferris, and his fingerprints on the dresser could have been left during any number of their sexual encounters. The defense presents an alternate theory for the killer's identity, insinuating that the real culprit is Tony Alvarez. But the prosecution has an explanation as to why none of Ferris's hair was found on the body, while dark hair was.
Perpetrators don't always leave hairs. We lose about 100 hairs a day naturally, but that doesn't mean that they're left at the time of the crime.
They claim the hair found on the victim came not from the killer, but from the rug upon which the struggle took place. Between all the parties and sexual partners, Cheryl Miller's bedroom was well traveled. Shed hair from several visitors over time ended up on the rug and were transferred to Miller's body when she was killed. Unfazed, Willman stuns the court with a new piece of evidence. His team has found the misplaced semen slides, the ones long ago used by the pathologist to determine the killer was sterile. If compared to Ferris's DNA, they could prove once and for all that he is innocent.
Well, yeah, Gabe Ferris was pretty certain, well, confident that he was going to win an acquittal.
It looks like Gabriel Ferris, after 8 years in jail for a crime he insists he did not commit, will soon walk free.
On these slides,
Semen evidence from long missing slides prepared at Cheryl Miller's autopsy appear to prove her killer was sterile. But as he did in 1974, trace evidence specialist Richard Bisbing questions the pathologist's findings.
Did you make the examinations back in '74 in regards to the slides?
Yes, I did.
Richard Bisbing states that although he concurred there was no sperm on the slides, the pathologist made several errors when he concluded the killer was sterile. Sterility cannot be determined by a microscopic examination alone.
There has to be a chemical test, there has to be some confirmation that there's semen there. It could be some other type of fluid, it could be natural secretions from the victim herself.
The swabs used to create the slides would have provided Bisbing with the sample needed for a chemical test. But the pathologist threw away the swabs he used to make the smears.
There was no way to confirm the presence of semen or not from those smears, and there was no way to do any blood typing from those smears.
Because the pathologist did not follow proper procedure, the sterility argument is destroyed.
So what you're saying really is the slides are no good?
Yeah.
No good.
Undeterred, the defense argues that a DNA test on the fluid from the slides, whatever it may be, will not match Ferris and therefore exonerate him. But Saginaw County's chief medical examiner shocks the court when he testifies the DNA tests cannot be applied because the fixative the pathologist used to preserve the slides destroyed any genetic material they contained. In a further blow to the defense, Terry Fick's new testimony explains why, in any case, her ex-husband might not have left any seminal fluid at the scene.
Well, when Gabe and I would have sex,
According to her, prior to ejaculation, he would pull out and not complete the act.
he would then go into the bathroom and finish himself there.
Mr. Ferris.
The prosecution lays out its theory of the murder for the jury.
Of the crime.
Gabriel Ferris drove from Alvarez, Michigan, all the way down to Saginaw, quite a haul, to see this young lady.
After confirming Miller was at the bar called The Scene, Ferris waited in the parking lot until she left. He watched as she headed home alone. He likely entered the house through the unlocked kitchen door.
confronted Cheryl. She was not happy he had just got married. She told him to leave, or some heated argument had taken place.
Gabe, what are you doing here? No, Gabe, get out. Get out. You're supposed to be home with your wife. Get out. Out of my house. Get out of my house.
That was not going to satisfy Mr. Ferris.
Gabe, get out. Your wife. Stop it. No, I don't.
He forced Miller into sex and lost control while strangling her to make it more exciting. Speculation is he either failed to ejaculate or ran to the bathroom to do so. When he returned, it was too late.
Mr. Ferris panicked. When he was getting up, was kind enough to leave his nice fingerprints on the bottom drawer of that dresser.
Out of shame for what he had done, Ferris covers Cheryl's naked body with underwear from her drawer.
From there, went downstairs, faked a break-in. He left, went back up north to resume his honeymoon with his wife.
Okay.
The jury deliberates for 2.5 days before returning with a verdict.
We find the defendant, Gabriel Ferris, guilty of felony murder.
I'm very happy that Gabe Ferris is behind bars for the rest of his life.
I can now say to the family, you know what? The person that killed your loved one is now going to have to answer for that in some way. For the family, it's nice to know that you're finally giving them some closure to what, in this case, took 20 years to do.
Gabriel Ferris continues to serve a life sentence without parole for the rape and murder of Cheryl Miller.